Welcome to MNN. It's so good to see you again.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. We talked to you some years ago. We got a lot of mutual friends, and I'm really interested in finding what's been going on since we did a program for 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
But welcome back. And I also want to let you know, I hope we can get you to consider becoming one of the faculty or the staff over here, or a producer of a series that could help extend your reach out into the world, but that's another issue. And welcome in the audience. Welcome. The guest for this program is Nellie Hester Bailey, a fixture in the Harlem area, I think, for a very long period of time. She's the founder or co-founder in any event and the director of the Harlem Tenants Council. She's concerned with tenant issues and has been fighting for justice for a very long time. And it's really a pleasure, Nellie, to welcome you once again to the program.
And thank you once again. I'm happy to be here.
I was just lamenting as you came in. I sang you Wait Till the Sun Shines, Nellie. They have no such song for Harold. Wait till the sun shines, Harold.
Perhaps we'll have to change that.
Maybe we could. Anyway, that's another issue. Anyway, welcome. And share with us your background, okay? You were born and raised, educated a little bit. And I know you've been involved with tenant issues for a very long time, particularly up in Harlem. And you also have a wide-ranging reading of the political and economic realities that need some changing in the name of justice. But could you share your own background, please?
Yes, I have a modest background. I was born and raised to a large extent in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's a university town.
Yeah.
The University of Alabama, made very famous by George Wallace when he stood in the doorway of the university to block the entrance of Authorine Lucy. I attended Stillman College, which is a land-grant college in Tuscaloosa. It's an industry town, university. My family were working people. I was sort of baptized in the civil rights movement through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. They recruited students to work on a number of projects at the time, and this was about the mid-'60s.
Mid-'60s, okay,
mid-'60s,
right. That's
and
right. That would be Mr. Carmichael or Kwame
that
Ture?
would be Stokely Carmichael at the time, and later on Kwame Ture.
Yeah.
H. Rap Brown was project director of Alabama, and I remember one project that I worked on, which was in Greene County, Alabama. It was a tent city project. You know, a number of students and faculty members and other activists helped to erect a tent city there. This was after tenement farmers had been evicted off this sort of plantation system after they had registered to vote. And one summer I worked in, I didn't work, but did voter registration at Mary Holmes Junior College. It's a college, very small college, on the Mississippi-Alabama border, and a number of students had been recruited from the Northeast, and we were there. So that was a very important project. But my involvement in SNCC as a student, not as a staff member, took me all over the South. A lot of times in Mississippi, and you know they were. It was a very critical period, but a period that was fraught with real danger, and a number of people, as you know, were murdered, were killed, missing.
Cheney
and all of that at the time.
Till,
it was a little.
Till.
Well, Emmett Till was a little earlier, but certainly everyone remembered that. I don't think there was a black household.
4 little baby girls down in Birmingham.
But getting back to Emmett Till, I don't think there was a black family in the South, or for that matter in the North, who did not have that Jet magazine copy with the Emmett Till story, and of course his courageous mother, who made the very courageous and politically important decision that she
Open
wanted the
casket.
world to see the open casket. She wanted the world to see what they had done to her son.
Yep.
And that, of course, propelled the civil rights movement, you know, in a very, not in a different path, but it certainly added a degree of militancy to the demand, and that this wasn't a matter of waiting, but it accelerated the pace of the movement.
If I remember correctly, Emmett Till came down from Chicago.
Yes,
He's
he
coming
did.
down from up north. And coming
Chicago.
down into that. And they had people, I don't know if you knew Lucy Commissar. She was there in 62 writing at a town, Green something, and everything. And people would go down, freedom riders would go down into that southern thing, Bull Connor and dogs, and just the racism that was so irrational and so violent and so forth. And it was just something that people would go down and sit in, the freedom rides and that. Now, it seems to me you wouldn't have been old enough to have experienced that as an adult.
No.
No. So, but by the time you became, when you were at Wallace and so forth, you would remember that just as a child or something, right?
Yeah, when I was in high school.
Yeah. Oh, high school. Okay. Well, you're of age in a certain sense, and things were going, and you had lived, your family had lived and been brought up in that environment of just blatant apartheid racism. It seems to me, although not to leave it only to the South, because it was really characteristic of the whole damn country.
Oh, yes.
You understand what I'm saying, though?
Yes, of course. My father lived in Chicago, and of course we remember the riots and what happened in Cicero, and you know, in Chicago has always been a very volatile town, just in terms of race relation and the apartheid, the economic and political apartheid that existed in Chicago for a very long time, that the city really did not break out of until the election of Harold Washington. Not to mention New York City, when you look at the Harlem riots. I mean, in the contemporary context for all of this is, of course, the continuation of the vicious and vile police brutality from Amadou Diallo, 41 times, to, I mean, and it just goes on and on and on.
Right.
So I think we have to have an analysis of racism and the structural racism in this country with respect to the entire country.
Apartheid is a term that was coming out of South Africa, and it did relate to racism. But then you said that we have economic and political apartheid.
Yeah, but that's all part of racism.
Well, perhaps. Okay, it is. Racism is part of that, but it's also part of a class view of the world where you have some who are well-to-do and property owners and influential and powerful, and the mass of the world, which is still like, I sometimes feel like a serf on a feudal estate. And we're picking up leaves.
Description.
It's still like that. I mean, the class injustice, the elemental injustice of the system that calls itself legitimate is not yet what the future certainly requires in terms of a proper organization of human society, I guess is the point. And it's probably basically political and economic inappropriate patterns that we've inherited out of history. And we're slowly making progress, but there's a heck of a long way to go yet. Well, particularly on a global scale.
Yes, I would agree. But I would just add to that, it's inappropriate. It's not the word that began to address the very deliberate policies of structural racism in terms of public policy, in terms of housing pattern, in terms of discrimination, in terms of state and police repression, in terms of the military-industrial complex, in terms of the military-industrial complex, and particularly after the draft was abolished, who those bodies are, and the appeal to more and more to the poor and working class to fill the ranks of the military. And it's because they have very few options other than the military. And now with this current economic collapse, we are seeing, we are going to see well, let me just put it this way. The worst has not yet come.
Yeah, certainly
That's
too
what we're
young.
faced
I'm
with.
almost old enough to remember, but very not in any means, of what they called the Great Depression of the 1930s. I mean, that was I was old enough. I was born 35, so I was born in the middle of that. But that was up in Detroit. I was drug up in Detroit. Detroit had its problems too, and
Well, the whole nation.
The
had
whole
its
nation, yeah.
had
But
its
that was a terrible thing where they had these awful situations. One would hope they can stave it off. We got a real prince, or at least my way of seeing it, in Mr. Obama. I think he's got all the hallmarks of a real class act. I'm so happy he got elected. Hope he can do something to stave off something like a breakdown of the whole world economic credit system and so forth, which would be very, very, very bad. But even at that, we still don't have, and then there was also gender issues. There's a lot of issues in terms of, it's a general, I'll say one thing. My favorite line out of poetry, I like poetry, culture, and this is James Joyce, who says, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken, and we have not yet awakened from the nightmare that weighs us down of history. We had chattel slavery.
Yeah, but
women couldn't vote until 1920. How the hell did we live in those times? Or we had serfdom and so forth. So do you think we're making progress?
Well, it's a man-made nightmare and disaster. I think we have to give it some context.
Okay.
And the political context for that is the free market model, and whether or not that has been successful, or rather has it added or improved the quality of life for the majority of people in this country? Not the top 1%, but the majority of people in this country. You mentioned earlier the Depression. Now let's just look at New York City now, currently today. I was just reading recently a report of the New York City Coalition for the Homeless. And they issued their December 2008 report. And here in New York City, there are 36,000 people in the city homeless shelter system, of which 16,000 are children. 90% of that population is in fact is composed of Black and Latinos. 90%, but we constitute 90%, but we constitute only 53% of the population
of
here
Manhattan,
in the
you're talking,
city.
or New York City?
We're talking about New York City and the New York City shelter system.
Okay, yeah.
So when you look at 36,000 people, that's the size of a small town.
Tell you.
And 16,000 of that population are children, and these are very young children. Now, I mean, that's pretty devastating.
What are the figures over the longer haul? Have you been keeping track of those kind of figures? And what is the trend, say, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth, in terms of those homeless statistics?
Well, let's look at, as they did in this latest report, we've seen a 13% increase in the past 6 months, the increase in this population. And of course, with this economic collapse, those numbers undoubtedly will increase. And on top of that, we're seeing the added pressures of gentrification, in which families have been forced out of the city, not only poor families, but middle-class families and middle-class white families have been forced out of the city. The New York Times did a study, I think they published it about a year ago, the Great Migration out of the city.
Out of the city,
Out of the city, and this was described as a migration that would not reverse itself, that the likelihood of those families and individuals returning to New York City was nil. And so they're going other places. But this is the lay of the land. And when one looks at the subprime foreclosure, when you look at not only the subprime foreclosure, which is really about home ownership, but when you look at the rental market here in New York City, because we have mostly renters here in New York City, not homeowners.
Is that do you happen to know the figure? You're in the tenant area and everything. What are the figures in terms of living space in, let's say, Manhattan or New York? In terms of renter, owner, co-op, all that kind of condominium.
I don't have that breakdown, but we know that this is a the city is densely populated and that we have mostly renters, not homeowners. But the point that I was trying to make in terms of the renters is the issue of predatory equity. And the not only the criminal and fraudulent role of the banks in the subprime lending scandal and Ponzi scheme, as I call it, but also
Ponzi as opposed to Ponzi?
Yeah, Ponzi scheme.
Oh, yeah.
The Ponzi scheme, which was named after an individual.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing here is, and what we have not discussed and talked about, is the rental market, the residential rental market, and what has happened there with predatory equity. Because
predatory equity, is that part of gentrification, or what is it?
It's part of gentrification, and it's also part of what has been happening here with the banks, and it is also part of this Ponzi scheme that has been taking place. And here's basically how it works. You have these developers and landlords. They buy these huge complexes. We'll just use one example in Harlem, for instance. The owner of the Riverton apartment, which is a middle-class complex, over 1,200 units. It's in central Harlem.
Where?
It's in central Harlem.
No, but what street?
The Riverton runs from about, let's see, the Riverton would be about 130, not 135th, but maybe 137th or 138th. Maybe I should give you a better example.
Well,
and it's from Fifth Avenue to the river.
Okay.
But anyway, the point here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a huge
That's
complex.
Huge, yes.
It's a huge complex.
That's not Sugar Hill. That's
no. It's further east.
Okay.
It's further
Sorry.
east.
Yeah.
So it's further east, and it's over 1,200 units. So what happens at the Riverton, which had recently its foreclosure canceled? The owners, Stellar Management and Rock Point, its partner, bought the complex, and they were going to increase their profits by deregulating over 53% of the units, which are rent-stabilized units.
They had been rent-stable. 50, what?
No, the scheme.
Yeah.
The scheme in terms of money, how they were going to make their money and pay back these huge mortgages that they had secured
for their building,
was that they had targeted 53% of the building to move from rent-stabilized apartments to luxury decontrol.
Now, how does that happen when you've got a rent-stabilized situation? It has to go through some sort of political process or something? How do they reassign a piece of real estate from rent-controlled to open to the market? I mean, what's the process? You'd be aware of that, right?
Well, yes. Well,
and that's part of gentrification, I guess, in some sense. But
well, it's a large part of it.
Huge issue.
It is a huge.
Yes.
It is a huge issue, but it is a political process in the broader sense.
Yeah.
But it's not a political process in the technical sense.
Really?
Because you're talking about private ownership. An even better example of which but similar.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah.
Is that of Delano Village that was renamed Savoy Parks. I mean, perhaps I should have started there.
Okay.
The landlord, which is Vantage and Apollo, bought the building for $175 million, and this was about 3 years ago. This was a speculative price, I think, far beyond the actual value of the building. It has over 1,800 units. It is in central Harlem. It expands from 139th to 141st. It's between 139th to 143rd, I believe. It goes from Fifth Avenue to Lenox Avenue or Malcolm X Boulevard. So the units, all of those units were rent-stabilized units for the most part, which meant that they were subject to the rent guideline increases that comes from the Rent Stabilization Board. Every year they pass an annual increase for rent regulated or rent stabilized tenants.
Something close to what the inflation would be, or something, I presume, or something like that, but not speculative.
Well, I think it's the increases are are not justified. The landlords base these increases on what they described and proclaim as their needs, but they have never released their financial books to substantiate their needs. So
but I meant the rate stabilized. The increases in the rent stabilization probably keeps pretty close to whatever the little raise in inflation.
I don't think so. I don't think we
it
can
goes
use
higher
that.
Than,
I don't think we can use that as an index. And I think this, to a large extent, and the argument has been, is pretty arbitrary because of the powerful real estate industry in the city that fills the campaign coffers. But let me get back to
but I want to get back to that. How they determine the price of rent stabilized apartments and what the percentage of that is in terms of the overall market.
The percentage is determined every year by this rent stabilization board.
And this
it is a board in which the members are appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
There are 2 representatives for tenants, 2 representatives from landlord. They are broken down into various sectors. Now, while it is true that they have criteria to gauge the amount of increases that they set, it is based on the financial profile of the real estate industry.
Well, okay.
And so my point being that if it's based on the financial profile of the real estate industry in which they calculate their loss and what it would take to maintain the buildings or whatever, that is supposedly what it is based on. But the point that I made to you, that would have some kind of credence if, in fact, the landlords would open their books.
And now if I may.
But they don't open their books.
Okay, excuse me. Let me get it straight. They're rent controlled, and they're buildings that are rent controlled, and there's different.
There are no rent controlled buildings. The units are rent controlled. The units, the apartment units, have a designation of either being rent controlled or rent stabilized.
Okay, that's 2 different things. Yeah.
Those are 2 different.
So that's different than the open market.
Yes, the open market would be vacancy decontrol.
So you might be paying, just say, $200 if it was in a rent stabilized. You'd be paying $800 for a similar thing in the open market.
No.
They are less than what the cost of the open market is.
Vacancy decontrol, which was passed in the New York State Legislature, allows the landlords, once the apartment becomes vacant, they can decontrol the apartment with certain amenities or certain renovations, and they can ask for rents of $2,000.
Right, that's the way it's going.
When it hits the $2,000 mark, it means the unit is no longer subject to the rent stabilization laws.
Yeah, the means by which they have a price that is stabilized or rent controlled is a political thing. It's a political thing that keeps the rents on some apartments lower than what the market would try to get in an open bidding kind of situation. What is it that keeps the rent controlled units rent controlled? It's a political process. It's agreed to over time.
Well, it goes.
Why?
Well, rent control goes back to the Tenant Emergency Protection Act.
When is that?
That was 1974.
74. Okay, thank you. Okay.
And so there was a piece of legislation that came out of the New York State Legislature that said that that if the vacancy decontrol rate did not exceeded 5%, then these laws would no longer be subjected, or we would no longer have this tenant protection clause. So the vacancy rate in New York City cannot rise above 5%, and if it does, then the rent control protection no longer exists.
But the reason for the rent control is that there are numbers of people who simply would not be able to pay that huge fee of a highly luxurious, gentrified apartment that the rich can, and it's to protect living capability. Or then they have the projects. They have the various housing projects. And that is controlled, and that's done means tested, and it's done for people who simply don't have, you know, a banker's salary to pay the high prices that the market might demand for a 3,000 square feet of land, of space or something.
Yeah, but I think the reality is that there is no market in this country without any kind of control. The lesson that we've just learned from the banks is that there were no regulations and no control, which is why we are in the situation that we're in today. So every market has to be regulated, including housing, because remember, the United States signed on to the UN Universal Declaration in 1947,
48.
in which
The UN
it's at 47 or 48?
Human
it's
rights,
40, yeah,
48,
48 of human rights.
Thank you for Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, right. But the point being that the U.S. signed on as a nation state to provide housing for its citizens. That's what they did. So, I mean, if we could reverse this conversation a little bit.
Okay, fine, by all means. I'm just trying to learn at a basic level.
Right. How we look at housing and how we look at housing, how we view housing.
By we, you mean the council or yourself?
The housing and other activists and other NGOs around the world, not only here in New York City.
Thank you,
How we view housing.
Okay.
We view it and we embrace the UN Universal Declaration of
great document.
1948 as a basic human right. And I think if you start there, that will help to set the framework for our discussion. So if that is number one, if that is the core of our view of housing as a basic human right enshrined in that UN declaration, and we look at the fact that even someone like Christine Quinn came up with that 1% of New Yorkers, as compared to the majority, 98% or 99% of the rest of the city, the rest of the city is not comparable to that 1%.
The wealthy,
so
the super wealthy,
the wealthy, the super wealthy.
That's the characteristic of the nation as a whole.
Right. So
the world, for that matter.
So we have to have we have to have regulations to moderate and we have to have regulations to moderate and to really to give us a guidepost as to what kind of laws we are going to have, so that in fact we don't have the kind of crisis that we have with 36,000 people being in the city shelter system.
How many have been in the shelter system when it got really bad? The recession of '82, the recession of the '70s. There were times when homelessness was worse than now, weren't there? Haven't there been times?
I understand from this recent report, again, from the Coalition for the Homeless, that that this is the highest rate of the number of homelessness in the city shelter system since the modern homelessness. And so I would think that, yes, that was their conclusion.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Could you send me a link to it?
Yes,
please. I'd appreciate it if you would.
And the prediction is that it is only going to get worse. But let me get back to the point I was trying to make about predatory equity and this
predatory equity. Okay,
or predatory lending, and the example that I was going to give. I started off with the Riverton, but that was a bit more complicated. So let me just go back
things get nuanced. Go ahead.
Let me just go back to something that I'm intimately involved with, and that is the situation of Delano Village. And as I said before, the building was purchased about several years ago for $175 million, refinanced a year later for $175 million was the original purchase price, refinanced less than a year after it was purchased for $350 million. So they doubled the refinancing. But part of the manner in which they were able to secure the lending or the refinancing, which is why it's called predatory lending, is that they told the financial institutions that put up the loans, that provided the loans and the capital, that a certain number of the rent-regulated units would become luxury decontrolled units. And they would do it in a span of time which would allow them to increase their cash flow to repay the mortgage and to repay the refinancing. But they were unable to do that because...
Why?
Well, they were unable to do that because, number one, the tenants organized themselves.
Okay.
That's number two.
Yeah.
And but even more important than that is that their prediction was based on this rather specious analysis that there was no way that they could have accomplished the conversion of the rent stabilized units to vacancy decontrol, that is units renting at $2,000. And once they hit that $2,000 mark, it's subject to whatever the landlord feels that the market can bear. And then, of course...
I don't understand that. The $2,000 mark seems to be
That's vacancy decontrol. Once the landlord is able to reach that $2,000 mark,
charging $2,000 for a unit,
then the unit is no longer subject to rent regulation. It is whatever the landlord demands, whatever he feels the market will bear.
Yeah, well, that's the open market will do that, whatever the market will bear.
Well,
but they're trying to get away from
but the
rent
open market
control.
is something that has been artificially inflated by the real estate industry, which is part of the problems that they're having now.
That's again part of gentrification and a business model where they can make a lot of money by catering to those who are wealthy.
Yeah, but here's the problem that they're having now, because now they have to repay those loans.
Right.
And so now, since they have not been able to convert those rent-regulated units to vacancy decontrol, then they're having problems with repaying their mortgages.
Right, so their business model wasn't able to realize itself as they were trying to project it.
That's right, because it's part of the speculation that has defined and shaped the market.
Well, recently, it's been a longer term thing. That, like, you repair to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but that is a not thing that's written into U.S. statute and so forth. That's not written into the law. There's laws, and then there's periods of regulation, deregulation. It goes back and forth and so forth. And this last 8 years has been absurd. I mean, it's just been Friedman all out with Mr. Bush and the Friedman guys, the Chicago guys, and setting up a market fundamentalist kind of mentality. But the roots of the whole system is and the subprime, even with the derivatives and everything. The thing is, the folks don't have enough money to pay the mortgages on the apartments, and they say they took an apartment because they thought the price was going to go up. The price of real estate has gone up consistently since the Second World War. It was a way for the people at the lower end of the economic ladder to get a net worth by having the appreciation on real estate, and they thought that was going to go up forever. And then they get these subprime loans where they get all out of whack with the interest rates and so forth. But it isn't, it goes back and forth. But you still have a lot of political pressure, apparently, in the place you're talking about, and residue of, concern for the folks, as it were, that had political ability to forestall some of the gentrification and the overriding of rent controls that had been applied historically out of the past. So that apparently still part of the equation, the organizing of the people into a politically effective group that can keep rent control and reasonable rents for the masses of the people who aren't part of the gentrified few.
Well, organizing and agitation is always agitation and education is always part of the equation.
Yeah, right.
Always.
That's what you're involved in a good deal of, and representing the interest of not the big real estate guys who are trying to get around the reasonable rates for the folks. You're representing the people, right? I should think you'd have a lot of enemies made within the real estate industry. A lot of the big players would not be happy to see you walk into one of their board meetings or something.
Well, I don't think that I would get invited into one of their board meetings.
You're a fighter for the people.
But I think the real estate industry has a much deeper problem and the crisis that we're in now with respect to what has happened, the economic collapse and its impact on the real estate industry, because it was an industry that was based on speculation, speculative capital.
Well, there's a lot of that goes on, and particularly in the venture of capitalism.
Yes, that's true. But as we look specifically at real estate and what is happening here, that is their problem, and therein lies their dilemma, which is why we have seen over and over again these foreclosures. We have seen a drop in the appraised value of these
20%
huge
nationally.
Well, here in New York City, I've read one estimate that it was 25%.
Really?
That the real estate value of some of these deals have fallen
since September or something like that last year, 6 months or so.
Well, in past year, about 25%. I know real estate, the value of real estate in Harlem is off by 15 to 20%, perhaps even higher than that.
Do you see the map they had, if I may, a little sidebar, in New York Times yesterday? I think it was yesterday's edition. They had a map, interactive map on the computer, and it gives the by county unemployment, and it goes right in on county, and it gives the facts, and you can go zoom in right on Manhattan, and an incredible map. I tried to I've saved it, and I want to keep it because it's great too. They could have the same thing for a lot of statistics. Is when I don't know if you happen to see that map. It's worth looking.
Yes, I did see that.
Did you go and try it and play it? I mean, it's amazing. You come in any county in the country, the rate of inflation, what it was over the last. Those kind of statistics in the name of what do you call accountability or openness and so on should be available to the folks on these issues that you're raising. It seems to me.
Well, I would agree.
Now that we got the tools to do that.
Well, I would agree with you because we have to begin to establish and create the empirical data that will substantiate our analysis.
Yes, right. That's right.
So
and you can make
I certainly
that was a sidebar, but I think it has the information.
It's applicable to what we're talking about.
Yeah, these things
generally.
interconnect. Yeah, right. And the thing in the real estate goes into the economy as a whole too.
Yes,
they've been hit upside the head. The whole economic system has been, and it's all global. It's global everywhere.
I couldn't think of it happening to better guys than the New York City real estate industry. Remember, this is a very powerful industry that has helped to shape in its favor public policy, laws, not only in Albany, but also the New York City Council, although we have seen some good legislation to come out of the council. But relatively speaking, particularly since the real estate industry are fill the coffers of the elected officials, their influence is just enormous. And a good example of that, getting back to this, this issue of gentrification and what is happening not only generally around the city, but specifically in Harlem. There's one project that I believe that I think is worthy of our discussion, and that is the expansion of university and institutions of learning. Columbia University. We also have the problem of NYU.
NYU downtown.
Yeah, right. But Columbia University's expansion.
They're going way up into the 130s or something.
It is from 125th to 133rd, from 12th Avenue all the way over to Broadway.
That's real town gown thing going on.
Yeah, right. It's about 18 acres. They want to demolish just about everything within the footprint, except for a number of buildings. There are some buildings that have been that have historic landmark, including the Cotton Club, that will remain. But this is a $7 billion project.
Holy Toledo! That's what Ev Dirksen would call real money.
Over a 25-year period. It's to be developed in 3 stages. The first stage is 10 years. But what is so amazing about this in terms of the scope is what they intend to do within this footprint,
or with the existing buildings and housing and whatever.
Most of the buildings they plan to demolish, but what Columbia University wants to do, which is great concern, not only locally, but it should be for the city as well as the nation.
Oh.
And there was this wonderful article by this scientist, Klaus Jacobs, that was in the Village Voice some months ago.
Okay.
And it talked about the university's proposal to build a series of bio-research laboratories in this footprint. And these are laboratories that can operate and will operate at level 3.
What does that mean?
That means that they can experiment with dangerous pathogens such as SARS, Ebola. And remember, these pathogens have to be transported into the site through a densely populated neighborhood and city itself. The site is surrounded for the most part by public housing. They want to burrow underneath the ground for these laboratories. This is in a designated floodplain area because, of course, the Hudson River is to the west of the site, 12th Avenue, and then there's the Hudson River.
Right.
The site itself and the development is going to be built over a seismic fault because there's a seismic fault.
There is a seismic fault in Manhattan, like the Andreas or something? Or
that runs across 125th Street.
No kidding, really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
It?
The article, I would strongly
Can you
urge
send a link? Do you have it in your computer, easy to send?
Yes,
You're going to send it to me as soon as you get home or to the office.
Okay,
thank you very much for that. I want to get that. That's interesting,
So you can read this report by Klaus Jacobs, a scientist at Columbia University. It's something that everyone should read. Now, Columbia University, in order to also, it's an important addition to this narrative is the fact that Columbia University, through this environmental impact statement that is required as part of the public review process, because the university has to show the mitigating circumstances of their expansions and how they will take care of those problems, how they would mitigate the problems that their research would bear out. And in this report, they concluded, Columbia University concluded, that over 5,000 families would be displaced. And of course, these are low-income families. What we believe, and I mean, not only what we believe, but what we know, and just going quickly, a digression here, back to 1968, when the students occupied Columbia University.
I remember it well.
There are a number of films.
Frances Fox Piven.
Yeah, right.
She's great.
But one of the students talked about, in fact, having combed through President Grayson Kirk's desk, and they uncovered plans that the university had to expand its campus up to its medical facility, which is at 168th. And we think that those plans are still on board. So that western corridor from 125th all the way up to their medical facility.
168?
Yeah, that's where their medical facility is there.
It's it's there.
Yeah, Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. That's their medical facility.
Okay. Well, now, in a certain sense, somebody's going to have to do the research. Somewhere it's going to be done. There's a thing called NIMBY or something, not in my backyard. They don't want, nobody wants an atomic reactor in their backyard. Nobody wants anything that's dangerous or something like that. So it's a problem. Then you had Robert Moses, who used to come with eminent domain in order to get the freeways. Well, you have to sometimes knock down, they say you have to break eggs to make omelets. You're going to make a big project. We're going to make a big thing that's going to benefit the overall society, and we can't let the little concerns of the people who happen to be there to get in the way of this great big major project that's going to benefit society. That's the way they'll argue, right?
Well, that is their argument, in fact. But
and there is something to that, no?
No.
No, you don't think so?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
How
Columbia
are we going to advance
let me just respond.
intellectually if we don't have places where the intellectuals can do their work? And
let me just respond to your question that you asked. Columbia University, this is a business deal for Columbia University.
Of course, it's a great big business. Education is a big business.
Yeah, but Columbia University is the third largest landlord in the city of New York, the third largest landlord in the city of New York. Their real estate holding is just immense. They just purchased a building in Harlem for $13 million. It is immense. Well,
$13 million is a heck of a lot.
Well, we're talking about one building. We're not talking about their real estate portfolio.
No,
We're just talking about how they can pick up
they're
property.
Who's the first and second? Do you happen to know real estate holders in America?
I don't know. I used to know, but I don't want to venture a guess.
Okay,
I understand.
Let's keep our
focus on.
On third is pretty good, and the value of the real estate is tremendous.
Let's keep our focus on Columbia University.
Okay, if you like.
Okay. That you raised,
and NYU's downtown got the same kind of things with Mr. Sexton.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And we got Mr. Bollinger still there, or who? No, who is the president?
Lee Bollinger is the president. He came from the University of Michigan,
Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Ann Arbor. He came with liberal credentials.
Yeah.
He, as a matter of fact, when he was at the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, he was in charge of one of the biggest land deals with the pharmaceutical company Pfizer that the university had ever had. But anyway, let's get back to Columbia University and the expansion.
Yeah. Okay.
Columbia University, because you raised the issue. The university.
Somebody's got to do the research. Yeah.
Yeah, but why should it be done on the backs of the poor?
Well, it always is. I mean, it always is.
But why is that acceptable?
I think
why is that acceptable?
Well, because it's got to do with power, and it's got to do with who can put.
So that's why we're in the business of reversing the power relationship. That's what movements are about. That's what Stokely Carmichael was about. That's what Malcolm X was about.
Yeah.
That is the nature of movements.
But we don't want to hold up progress in the name of intellectual investigation.
I don't think that
they're going to. Let's say, Mr. Pasteur, we don't want to hear about your thing. If you're going to set up a thing that claims there's some germ theory that's or Mr. Salk, don't you be developing something that's going to help all the people because you're going to displace some people who are living down by the beach where you're going to put your. There's going to be that kind of thing necessarily go on. They have eminent domain built into the process.
Let me just respond to that. Columbia University had other alternatives.
Okay, then that's.
If there are other alternatives, then why would one choose to transport dangerous pathogens through a densely populated neighborhood in a densely populated city post 9/11, particularly if there are other alternatives, as there were with the university. The Columbia University has land upstate, away from densely populated communities,
where they could do their pathogen research.
Well, of course, where they could do their research. This is just greed and a land grab in which Columbia University will have not only city streets and sidewalks, but the land underneath the ground. Why should they have that at our expense? Plus, they have been able to use eminent domain to seize the private property of private owners.
Yeah, well,
They are a landlord.
Remember, Robert Moses built all the throughways, and you had to get a throughway through to get it. And he had to make big things. They had to make big swaths and cut down, and they had to move. And it's called they call it progress.
No.
And you'll not have any of the great big buildings and things that we need and the great economies that.
But we're not talking about
a freeway. That's what they say.
We're not talking about
a freeway. No, but you understand that's the principle of eminent domain is you cannot just have an individual who has a certain thing in order to. The individual can try and So progress is called progress, and that you don't want to stand in the way of progress. But if there are alternatives, by all means.
Well, I disagree.
Understand.
Well, I disagree with you on the issue of eminent domain.
Okay.
New York State has the worst the most abusive eminent domain laws than any other state.
Is that a fact? Really?
That is a fact.
What
that
about
is
on the
fact.
national level? We have eminent domain. Is that something
Of course,
that they
we
can
have
add
the
to
Supreme Court decision of Kelo versus the City of New London. That was the famous Supreme Court decision of several years ago, in which Kelo was just a family who owned a house. The city of New London, Connecticut decided that they wanted this wonderful property because it was along the waterfront, and that they were going to bring in luxury condos, a shopping mall, and this community had to go to make way for this luxury development. And so Kelo sued. The case went before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled because it expanded the use of eminent domain. It expanded the definition of the greater public good. And that was that a private eminent domain could be used for the confiscation of private property by a private developer.
Yeah, right. That's right.
You know,
that's relatively recent, isn't it?
Yes. Well, look at Michael Ratner.
God bless Michael Ratner.
Well, I don't know whether I would want God to bless him, but when we look at the Atlantic Yards project, why should private homeowners help Michael Ratner enrich himself? Because
you're not talking Michael Ratner. Michael Ratner's
Bruce Ratner.
Bruce Ratner.
I'm
sorry. Big difference between Michael Ratner and Bruce
Michael
Ratner.
Ratner is with the
Michael Ratner is Center for Constitutional Rights. He's an angel, certified.
No.
Certified.
I stand corrected. I meant Bruce Ratner. Obviously, I meant Bruce Ratner and the Ratner
Got to get those
Enterprise.
first names right.
Well, no, you're going so fast here, and your defense of the real estate industry has.
No, I wasn't. I thought you were talking about Michael Ratner.
No. I'm talking about Bruce Ratner.
Okay, he's a big real estate maker.
Right, but let's get back to Columbia University.
Okay,
so we won't digress here. Let's get back to Columbia University.
Just for your information, we've got about 7 minutes left. We've got to get it all in, right?
Let's get back to Columbia University.
Okay.
So here's the problem that we have, but we have a holdout. We have one of the property owners in the site, Nick Spray Reagan, is suing Columbia University, and that is holding it up. But I don't think that Columbia University has the right to enrich itself off the community of West Harlem. I don't think so.
Well, what should they do you think?
They should build their laboratories in some other
But what about
site.
the general expansion?
But wait a minute. Let me
and
answer
the
your
Lebensraum. They need Lebensraum.
Wait a minute. Let me answer your question. Let me answer your question so I won't make a Ratner faux pas again. So let me just answer your question.
That's okay. Yeah.
The community board, the local community board, and that is Community Board 9, had in its 197A plan a proposal for Columbia University to expand in conjunction with the wishes of the community.
How do you define the community? Okay, go ahead.
This was a plan that came out of Community Board 9. Supported by the local residents. Columbia University rejected this. Columbia University wanted to have its own way. It was their way or no way. And that's what they proceeded. So the 197A plan of Community Board 9 was an alternative to Columbia University's master plan. So you cannot assume or conclude that there were no other alternatives for the university, because there were, and that was the 197A plan of Community Board 9 that was rejected by Columbia University.
Was it a real serious study? Was it done with backup and lots of footnotes and everything? It wasn't just something put on an envelope.
No,
or
a
something.
197.
You know what I'm saying?
No. A
197A
plan is a plan that is adopted by every community board on the issue of land use. This is a very serious endeavor. Community board members are appointed. It's a quasi-governmental organization. so it really is very serious.
And on the Columbia side, they had a business plan, or they had an expansion plan that they were presenting and what they wanted to do. Community board took exception to that, said there are alternatives, and Columbia did not agree to that. What's the status of things in real terms now? Are the plans of Columbia going forth? Is it building? Is it going out? Are there plans? Is their business plan working out?
There is an approval.
How's it going?
There is an approval process. It was approved by the New York City Council.
The Columbia plan was.
The Columbia University plan has to go before the City Council.
Okay.
It was approved in December of last year, I believe. No, it was December of 2007 it was approved.
That's an important body for New York City. And the mayor's office is involved?
Of course it's involved.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the politics of how it works.
Yes, it is involved. As a matter of fact, it really is part of Mayor Bloomberg's comprehensive master plan.
Okay.
I think to redo New York City, which the net impact of all of that is to drive out working class people, i.e. Black and Latino people. They will be the sector most impacted by this. Every single mega development that has gone before the New York City Council has been approved by the New York City Council.
What they got 50 members or so? How much? What's the voting you need to getting that from the City Council? Is it a 50%, 60%, 70%
I think you need a majority vote.
A majority vote does it, right? Because you got some good people in the City Council.
Yeah, but it becomes a moot point because the only two council members who have really voted against any of these mega developments, who have distinguished themselves, have been Charles Barron and Tony Avella, who is running for mayor. So that's the only distinction there.
Tony Avella's running for mayor?
Well, yes, he's announced.
Okay,
yes.
I am not up to date. You have to excuse me.
He's announced.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the point being here.
And he's with Barron?
I said that they were the two city council members who have consistently voted against
Barron's very vocal.
These mega development projects that have come before the city council.
A major issue. Where does Ms. Quinn stand on all that?
Well, I think she's clearly shown that she stands with Mayor Bloomberg.
Okay.
I think that's pretty clear.
Well, okay. So that's a David and Goliath situation. You have the established order. You got two people on the board that vote against it. So it's a David and Goliath.
Isn't that always the situation?
I guess it usually is, isn't it? Mostly it doesn't. Okay. Forgive me. I'm so out of touch with the local scene. That's all. I appreciate it very much. Yeah.
No. I think
so. Avello is his name.
Avella. Tony Avella.
He's running for mayor.
He is running for mayor, and he
Seriously?
has announced.
Yeah.
Well, I assume that he's serious. I assume that he's serious.
Okay.
But anyway, I think we should sort of
we got to round it out. We got 1 minute left, so let's get it in quick.
I think we should wrap up here.
Yeah.
We, of course, the Harlem Tenant Council is organizing as much as we can. We have 3 basic components to our program, and that's one of organizing, education, and also agitation.
Right. Agitate,
Yeah. As Frederick Douglass said, organize and agitate. On his dying bed, that's what he said.
Yeah.
And so, but I do think that we will have a breathing spell.
Okay.
With this economic collapse, and that these large projects, particularly the makeover of Harlem, will not proceed as some had projected.
So robustly as they thought it might.
And when you look at the 125th Street river-to-river rezoning, so much we didn't talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's always like that. Yeah.
We got sort of sidetracked into, but I do think that times, unfortunately, are going to get harder.
Yeah.
I think this stimulus package from the Obama administration has to be looked at and lobbied so that it will not go through the usual channels where it ends up as a patronage plum for the elected officials.
Or for the established interests.
For the established interests.
And we have to
I don't believe that Bruce Ratner
It's
should
B-R-U-C-E, yes.
Bruce Ratner, and not his distinguished brother, who has given us, as he has challenged extraordinary rendition under the Bush administration, should not be confused with his brother. And if at all